Sunscreen was invented about 140 years ago, so obviously not me. But what I did do is, I'm sure you're familiar with the transparent zinc oxide, so I did invent that in 1991.
The biggest problem when you're surfing, I'm constantly rubbing my eyes. I'm like, it's just impossible.
We have a particular kind of formulation. It's called a reverse emulsion. They're built to be waterproof, really water resistant. It's opposite of what most sunscreen companies do.
You're telling me that actually a lot of mineral sunscreens are not have all these other ingredients that could be harmful to reefs and could be harmful to me as well, even though it says it's like mineral sunscreen.
The other stuff they put in there, octyl-butyl salicylate. It's one atom off from a sunscreen that would have to appear in the active list. Do I think it's bad for you? Probably not, but it's much less studied because sunscreens are really, really studied. So it's really just misleading.
There is no entity that determines whether or not something is reef safe. Sunscreen companies that say reef safe, they follow a standard, and then their formula is reef safe based off of the standard that they're following.
Do you struggle with your paddle power? Well, I can go months without surfing and roll to pumping waves and surf 3-hour sessions multiple times a day, day after day after day by using the Basis Paddle Trainer. It was a total game changer for me, and it can be for you too. These things actually work, unlike elastic resistance bands. You can train your paddling anytime, anywhere, so you can catch more waves and have more fun. Just 10 to 20 minutes a couple times a week, and you're gonna be in insane paddle shape. Right? So remember, the key progression is more waves, and the key to more waves is more paddle power. Check it out at surfbasis.com. You're gonna be stoked.
All right, welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. This one is going to be an interesting one about a topic that is a little different from what we normally cover, where I'm interviewing pros and coaches and shapers, but we're going to get into a topic that I think is really a crucial one for all surfers, which is how to protect your skin, right? And sunscreen. And so if you're like me, I've pretty much experimented with it seems like I've tried almost every different sunscreen that's out there, and there's nothing that really quite works. And, it's an eternal struggle for so many people. I mean, I'm lucky that I'm Asian, so I don't get crazy burns, but I do definitely get burned. But I have friends that have literally gone on what should have been the surf trip of their lives and then had to cut it short because they got, like, my buddy went to Salina Cruz and got 3rd-degree burns and couldn't surf for half the trip because the burns were so bad. So, I think this is a topic that really affects anybody that's a surfer, regardless of whether you get that burned or whether you just want to make sure you don't look like a wrinkled raisin, and that's a big thing. So it was a very interesting, kind of random how I met these guys. So I met Malachy. I was down in Costa Rica, and he was telling me how his dad invented sunscreen. I was like, what? Your dad basically invented sunscreen? That sounds like BS, but okay, let's see where this is going. And then it turns out he was actually working on they're developing this new special kind of sunscreen. So we got Malachy and Mark. Mark apparently invented sunscreen, and then Malachy.
Yeah. Also,
I'm 140 years old, but yeah.
Also, weird flex to say in the water, which I understand, but yeah.
Yeah. So super random, but yeah. So I wanted to dig into it, and I wanted to get super nerdy and just be. I mean, the questions that I have are, I'm really skeptical. So when it comes to anything that is going to hit, be on my skin and potentially protecting me against, getting skin. I have friends that have had skin cancer and then had to be out of the water because they had to, cut out. Our friend Asher, he had sunscreen on his lip, and he was like, it rocked him for months. And it's super gnarly. So, a lot of people think it's not that big of a deal. Like, how bad is skin cancer? And they think it's something minor, but how bad did Asher have it? He was like out of the water. He couldn't surf for like months. He was sick for a long time, right, Malachy?
Yeah, he was really bad with it. And I met him in Costa Rica right around the time that I met you.
Yeah.
And he's, sort of close friends with our extended friend circle. But he was telling me it just completely took him out. He like full blown went to the doctor, thought everything was fine. It turns out he's late 20s and has, melanoma, which, untreated would kill you.
Yeah.
And by his own admission, he's a sunscreen nut, wore it all the time, tried to never go in the water without it. And on your lip of all places, which, is famously a hard place to put sunscreen on and get it to stick. But yeah, it's one of those things that, I know when I was a little kid growing up, and luckily I had a former iteration of this sunscreen, and it was really the only thing that worked for me. But when you're a little kid, you don't think about that. Like, it's stupid, but I thought, I want to be tan, so I look good. And when I go to the movies later with a girl, like, I'm going to look good. And then when I started going down to Central America, I got the same thing, 3rd-degree burns. I'd come back and it would be blisters on my face, and it would look like that, like I walked out of some science experiment gone wrong. Again, you're a little kid, and that's more of an inconvenience than anything. But as we get older, it's not just the aging thing. It is that sort of real factor of, holy shit, I could get skin cancer one day. And then my mom actually got skin cancer, and luckily that they caught it before she had to go through chemo twice. Yeah,
Twice she said melanoma removed.
yeah.
Wow.
And granted, we have that pasty Irish skin, so it's not exactly meant to weather the tropical sun.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that, especially as surfers, we don't think about, but it is looming at all times, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And just for those of you that aren't watching and are just listening in, Malachy is basically the Kelly Slater 2.0 with his own brand. He's the competitor to Hydrocell because he is lacking in the hair department. So he gets Central American sun all day, all night on that beautiful head of his.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's my charging port. It's where I get all my energy from. But I definitely have a lot of surface area to cover.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're solving the problem for yourself, which, always makes me, that's usually where the best solutions come from. But let's start with like Mark apparently inventing or basically invented sunscreen. Tell us about that assertion. It sounds kind of crazy. Like what exactly?
Yeah, so it's a little crazy. So sunscreen was invented about 140 years ago. So obviously not me. But what I did do is, I'm sure you're familiar with the transparent zinc oxide, the clear zinc oxide that everybody says they have in their sunscreens. So I did invent that in 1991.
Wow.
And we started my brother and I started a company around that. We didn't have a sunscreen brand. We made the zinc oxide itself, and we sold it to all the sunscreen brands. And we sold that business in 1995 to a very big chemical company called BASF, and still held the patents for it. The patents have long since expired. But yeah, so I did not invent sunscreens, but I was a big part of modern sunscreens.
And so that's what I always thought. I always thought that like the best sunscreens have zinc oxide. That's the key ingredient that I would always look for. So tell us first of all, like how zinc oxide works, like what made it different from what came before, and why is it so important?
Yep. So I'm going to use a paint analogy. I'm going to use a bunch of paint analogies. So 200 years ago, white paint was made out of zinc oxide. So it was, big chunks of zinc oxide. When I say big, you could see them, maybe pick them up with the tweezers, and they mixed them in oils and they painted your fence with it. And it worked, but it wasn't that great, right? It wasn't that white. And so industry, mostly in the US, figured out, and Germany actually, that titanium dioxide, which is another sunscreen ingredient, right, was a lot whiter. And so titanium dioxide completely replaced zinc oxide in sunscreens. And then about 100 years ago, some guys who make zinc oxide weren't happy with that because that was like the major use of the stuff. And they were trying to figure out how to make zinc oxide whiter. So they figured if they make the particles smaller, and if you want, I can get into the physics, but it's kind of torture. But if they make the particles smaller, it's going to be a better reflector, right? It's going to get whiter and whiter and whiter as the particles get smaller and smaller. And it turns out that was true to a point, and then it started getting less white. So they make them smaller, it gets more and more white, and then they get down to a certain size and it starts getting less white. And at some point, it becomes almost transparent. Right? And that has to do with the way the light bounces off little particles. For titanium dioxide, that never happens, at least not within reasonable levels. So you can make TiO2, titanium dioxide, smaller and smaller, and still just gets white, which is the reason, and this translates directly into sunscreens, why titanium dioxide sunscreens are a lot whiter than zinc oxide sunscreens. And so to answer your question, the fundamental difference or thing about zinc oxide is that it scatters, right, reflects ultraviolet A light, which you hear a lot about. You hear about UVA and UVB, but it actually absorbs UVB, just like the organic sunscreens, which are sometimes called chemical sunscreens. Titanium dioxide just scatters both, right? And that little difference, which is admittedly really in the weeds, is the reason it works so well as a sunscreen. And you can make a transparent sunscreen with it. Does that make sense?
Actually, okay. So zinc oxide, titanium oxide work by reflecting UVA in the case of zinc, and then UVA and UVAB in the case of titanium oxide.
Yep.
And then the size of the particle determines like how white it looks. And so that's actually really interesting, right? Because you definitely are in the lineup, and then there's that dude that has like, looks like a freaking zombie, right?
Yeah.
But he looks super protected. He looks super protected. And I'm like, I should be doing that, but I just don't want to look like a kook. But are you saying that that's zinc oxide? So it looks like he has a really good barrier against UVA, but he's not protected against UVB at all.
Not as much. And in fact, his UVA barrier isn't even really that good. So it's completely counterintuitive. But if you take that guy with the diaper cream on his face, basically, the white stuff, unless it's on like a 1/4 inch thick,
right, it
might have an SPF. I'm going to make up a number here, but it's not too far off. The way most people would put it on, it might have an SPF of 10 or 12. Right,
like the Zinca stuff is like zinc, but it's like super thick. I mean, but
exactly.
That stuff says it's like I don't remember, but that stuff does say that it's like SPF 45 or whatever. But
yeah, and it could be if you put enough on.
Okay.
And there's all kinds of regulations about that, which we can get into. But the reality is the small particle stuff actually protects better pound for pound than the big stuff, even though you can see through it.
That is crazy.
Which is always a kicker.
It is crazy, because it makes no sense when you say it out loud. But that is the way it works.
Yeah, and as a surfer growing up, that was always a kicker for me, which was like you see, typically the old guy with the big log surfing not that well with his face completely caked. And same thing, I was like, okay, that guy has absolute protection, but there's just no way in hell that, one, I'd let my friends see me paddle like that. But two, when you do that, and anyone who's surfed can relate to this, but the moment that you rub your eyes or touch your face or even are just out for a while, it just ends up streaking into your eyes. And so it was like this like constant, kind of annoying battle between, do I cake my face and look like an idiot? Do I get a bunch of sunscreen in my eyes and it stings and they're all red? And, it's funny, starting this company has been like a master's in sunscreen. I'm learning a lot of this stuff sort of on the fly from Mark. And that subtle point of there's not an inverse relationship, but not a direct relationship between more crap on my face and better protection. That to me, even doing this was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but science is science.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. If all you have is that stuff, wear it. Right. I mean, goofy is one thing, skin cancer is another. Premature aging, which is probably the majority of reason people wear sunscreen in the U.S. anyhow, is it's all sun related.
Right. That's still so hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yep.
Because my whole evolution, because again, I've tried a bunch of stuff, right? I tried the creams, right, and those felt like they weren't as strong, and they would just rub off, and then my eyes would be stinging, right? Like what you're talking about. So then I got really obsessed with I was like, okay, I want stuff that feels like it just cakes on like super thick. So then I was really, Inventor came out, and there's all these pros that use Vetra, right? And so I tried that, and like literally, you can rub your face like after a 3-hour surf, and then you're rubbing your face in a towel and there's still stuff coming off. I'm like, this must be really strong because it's so cakey. It's almost like foundation. But then what really tripped me out is the Vetra with the foundation, like skin toned stuff.
Tinted.
Then I think that was like SPF 40, but then they had the clear one that was like a yellow one, but it was clear, and that had an SPF 50. And I was like, how does the clear one have a higher SPF than the one that looks like cake?
Yep.
And I couldn't tell which one. And then my friends would be like, yeah, the Vetra stuff, it feels like it's thick on there, but I get burned just as much. Like my brother used it a lot, and he's like, dude, I'm still getting, because he gets burned really easily, and he was like, dude, I'm just getting burned just as much. So what's going on there?
So the way sunscreens work, and again, there are two kinds. There's what everybody calls the physical or mineral, whatever. It's titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, and these are literally little rocks. They're tiny. They're twice the size of a virus, but they're rocks. And then there's the organic sunscreens, which people also call chemical. Kind of a pet peeve of mine. Everything's a chemical. You're a chemical. There is no such thing as a non-chemical sunscreen.
Right.
But and so those chemical sunscreens, those organic sunscreens, and zinc oxide in UVB, the light hits it, UV light in this case, the molecule absorbs it. All right, and it's so whenever something absorbs energy, it's got to do something with it, right? It can't absorb it indefinitely, and they kick it back out. So if you ever you put on you use black light paint or something, and you go under UV light and you glow. What happens is that paint is absorbing the ultraviolet light, and then it re-emits it as whatever color glows. So purple, green, whatever ink they use. Same exact thing with sunscreens, except they re-emit usually in something called infrared, which you can't see. Zinc oxide does the same thing in UVB, but titanium and zinc just bounce it back. And so that's the reason it can be super thin, as long as it's a good film, where it's molecule against molecule against molecule, the sunscreen. So there's no little holes in the window. It can protect. It's exactly how it's supposed to work.
Okay, so theoretically that the clear Vetra, which is like yellow, but you put it on and it becomes clear, is actually stronger than the one that feels like cake.
It could be. It could be.
Right.
And chances are, you guys can look it up and read the ingredients to me. Chances are they've got the good amount of the organic sunscreens in there, or they're cheating, which a lot of companies do. And they have, when you look at a sunscreen made in the U.S. or Europe, it lists active ingredients and then other ingredients. So they've got to do that. That's what the law says. But there are some things that you can put under other ingredients which act just like the sunscreens in every way. And so that's kind of in our view anyhow, a pretty sleazy move, because if you grab an SPF 50 all zinc formula, there's a really good chance they're cheating. And so are those chemicals they're using bad for you? Probably not. But if you want an all mineral formula, that's your choice. You should be able to get that without having a PhD in chemistry, so that you can read the ingredients and spot the sneaky sunscreen. So that's in some major brands in the U.S. It's in a bunch of the all mineral, all natural sunscreens. I can name some of the ingredients for you if you want that you can look for. But like if you look up, you can name brands. I won't name brands, but there's a lot of really popular surf brands that do this.
Really? So people think they're getting an all mineral, meaning like, oh, it's natural.
Yeah.
Sunscreen, but they're not. It turns out that there's a lot of chemicals, although everything is a chemical, right? But there's all these other ingredients that are what other people would classify as chemicals. Okay, so that's like a big kind of myth that a lot of brands are operating under or trying to portray to their customers. Okay.
And that's not true of all. Like we've got a pure zinc product that's still in testing right now. It's going to be an SPF probably 20 or 22, something like that. And that's just the only sunscreen in there is zinc oxide, nothing else. But if we want to get a 30 or 40 out of that, and we want to look just as good as it does right now, because even zinc, it's transparent. You put enough in there, it starts getting white.
Yeah, because that's what I see all the time. That's another pet peeve. Like I want the best of both worlds. I want to look like I'm not wearing sunscreen, but I want it to work like I have really thick sunscreen on. But you're saying, okay, so the more natural we want to make it, the more mineral we want to make it, it's going to make your face white, and there's a good chance that it actually has a lot of chemicals in it, unless you like really pay attention to reading the ingredients and whatnot. Okay.
Yeah, and the chemicals, so to speak, aren't bad for you.
Right.
That's another whole part of the conversation we'll probably get to.
Yeah. Well, so let's. Okay, that's definitely one thing I want to chat about, right? So like, are these chemicals really bad? Okay, but before this is still something I'm really stuck on, right? Is like the cream, because for me, so I would use Vetra, I would use all this other stuff, and then I'm down in Central America for like a month at a time. I run out of the stuff, and I just end up using the local stuff, which is literally like cocoa butter. It's like butter, cocoa, and like zinc in it, and it comes on super thick. It doesn't rub off like the Vetra stuff, but it feels like I have a cake on my face. Like how effective is that stuff?
So it could be pretty good. It depends how well they disperse the zinc oxide, what zinc oxide they used, how much of it you put on. Right? People always underuse sunscreens. But here's the story. So I'm my first job, and where I always still think is as a doc. Right? I'm a pediatrician, and no medicine is good unless somebody actually uses it. All right, and so sunscreens that are not pleasant to use don't do anybody any good, because you might use it one day, right? You're going out at noon, it's super hot, but you're going out 10 in the morning, you say, what the hell? I'm only be out for an hour. Who needs it? It's not worth the trouble. You're still getting creamed, so to speak. You're still getting a lot of UVA, maybe not as much UVB. UVA is kind of constant throughout the day. UVB changes with the time of day. So you're still doing all this damage. It's much more silent, but the people making that aren't doing you any service by making it unpleasant to use. So swinging back to sort of our reason to be, we want to make a really good sunscreen that really works. And part of really works means people will use it.
Right. Okay. So then the hard stick isn't necessarily stronger than the cream.
Absolutely not.
The physical barrier, like how thick it looks, is not necessarily the indication of how well it's going to protect.
That's true. If you take a good sunscreen, you put more on, it's going to work better. Right.
Okay.
But if you take a crappy sunscreen and you put a ton on compared to a good sunscreen with less, it's not going to work better. And the thing, sticks, people, it's essentially a candle with sunscreen, right? I mean, that's in every way. That's what it is. And I like sticks, and we'll eventually probably get around to making one. But if they're too hard, you can't get enough on, right? It's literally like putting wax on your board. You've got to push too hard to get enough of it on your face to do a lot of good. So it is convenient,
right,
but not necessarily better.
Okay. So then the other hurdle that people are going to have, and which is a concern of mine as well, right, is like, how safe is it for my skin? And then also how safe it is for the reefs that I'm surfing, right? Yep. So like, that's why there's this whole push towards mineral sunscreens, because it's natural. But you're telling me that actually a lot of mineral sunscreens have all these other ingredients that could be harmful to reefs and could be harmful to me as well, even though it says it's like mineral sunscreen.
Yeah. So let me qualify some of that stuff. So the mineral sunscreens are, as far as anybody knows, really safe for you and pretty safe for the environment.
Okay.
All right. The other stuff they put in there that they're one atom off from the chemical sunscreens, right? So one is called octyl butyl salicylate. So if you look at a really well-known brand in the sort of tan bottle that you guys probably see a lot of, you'll see it's like the second or third ingredient. It's one atom off from a sunscreen that would have to appear in the active list. So it's exactly the same thing. Do I think it's bad for you? Probably not, but it's much less studied, because sunscreens are really, really studied, right? The government makes sure of that. And you don't know how much is in there. You just know that it's a lot because it's one or two on the ingredient list. But more importantly to me anyhow, and I said this before, if you don't want to use that stuff, you should have the right not to use it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that stuff, but that's your choice, not my choice. And so it's really just misleading when companies use these chemicals, these organic chemicals, to boost the SPF.
Yeah, and this is a really important point for me, which is like, first off, I don't think that mineral sunscreens are better or worse than chemical sunscreens. It's like saying that a pickup truck is better than a sports car. They're two different things that serve different purposes. And so having a conversation like this one's really good and that one's crap isn't the right way to approach the problem. And for us, just using us as an example, ours is a hybrid sunscreen. So we have chemical sunscreens in there, organic sunscreens, and we have mineral sunscreens in there. And the reason is because we need those things to make it work the way that we want it to work, which is protecting you for a long time, super, super water resistant, and feels like a nice cream on your face. And that's what we've defined as working. And it just gets back to this point of like, the common misconception is one's good, one's bad. And that's a really easy way to understand the world, right? I get that. It's the basic story of everything. But the reality of is, one's not good, one's not bad. It's one works for this use case, one works for that use case. And where we're getting at here is one of the reasons that, I was so motivated to work on this, which was just that it's bullshit. Like, if you don't know what you're putting in your face or on your body, which all of us can relate to, buying something in the health food section, and then it comes back that, sure, there's no sugar in it, but it has a bunch of this artificial sweetener that comes out that's really bad for you. At best case, that's misleading. At worst case, that's actively lying to you. And it goes beyond just being annoying to the fact of, we all want to have, to the degree that we can, control over what we put in our bodies, what we put on our bodies. If you can't make that decision for yourself, then that's, in my opinion, kind of bullshit.
Well, it is hard. So making that decision, so I'm a pediatrician. If my dad has a heart issue, I don't ask myself. I go find someone who does that for a living, right? Even though I went to medical school too, and I'm probably in a decent position to make a decision, there's guys who know a lot better. So, it is incumbent upon all of us to learn about the stuff that we do to ourselves, but it's also really helpful if you got somebody or a brand or something that you actually trust that just pays attention to that little part of the world that can tell you, here's what I learned. And, and then you have sort of, a source of truth, whatever that truth might be. But I want to circle back to your question, because we didn't answer entirely. Is it safe for you? Is it safe for the environment? Right? So there's two parts to it. One is the chemical itself, whether it's zinc oxide or octinoxate, which is one of the more common organic sunscreens. So first, does it get anywhere where it can do damage? That's in you, or it's called some coral reef someplace, and that's a function of the chemical itself, and it's also a function of the formulation, right? And you already figured this out. You might not have said it out loud yourself, but I'm going to circle back to that. So when people talk about the chemical sunscreens being bad, it's always in the context of endocrine disruptors, right? And you probably heard that term. And what that means is, does that molecule float around and find a receptor that, like estrogen or testosterone or one of these sex hormones, would bind to it instead, and fool your body into thinking that there's more estrogen there than there is actually in real life. And so they do these experiments in test tubes, and they've got cells floating around, and they pour in a bunch of, this chemical or that chemical, and they see if they get a response from the cells. And if they do, and you're assigned to say, okay, well, that happened in a test tube, so maybe it happens in the real world. So with sunscreens, especially one called benzophenone, right, which is one that this is probably true about, you can see a response. In the test tube, you can see a response with some of the other sunscreens also. But when they look at animals or humans, you don't see that response, because not enough of it ever gets anywhere. So yeah, you can find it in your blood, but I can do a blood test and I can find 1 part per trillion of a sunscreen. So it's, literally I can find 1 molecule in a trillion other molecules with the kind of instruments that I can go buy, off the web right now. And so just being able to find it doesn't mean that it's toxic. You have to actually look at human or, God forbid, animal data and make that decision. So there is no data to show, in fact, there's data to show that this isn't true, that these things are toxic in humans, with the exception of benzophenone. So with
benzophenone is potentially, because it
yeah.
has a response. Okay.
So people look at this stuff. If it occurs in you at 1/10 or more, the dose that happens in test tubes, so you've got a safety window of 10 times, they start looking at that and going, not so much, right? We don't like that. And it's in that sort of 10 window. The others are in 100 or 1,000 times difference.
Got it.
Yeah.
And there are popular sunscreens that use benzophenone, you're saying?
There were. It's less and less. It's also not a great sunscreen.
Okay.
And if you were allergic to sunscreens, there was a very good chance it was actually benzophenone you were allergic to it. So it had a lot of baggage. And so no modern sunscreen uses it anymore, outside of, something in Russia, So the other part of it is, let's look at the environment and the formulation. So the formulation's job is to keep it on the skin. Another one of my pet peeves. You'll hear a lot of people say, including dermatologists, that the chemical sunscreens work by getting into your skin. It's just completely wrong. Some of it does get into your skin, but that's not how they work. They work by forming this nice layer on top of your skin. So the formulation's job is to keep it on your skin, keep not in your skin and not in the ocean.
Which is hard. That's
hard.
The biggest problem when you're surfing. My eyes, I'm constantly rubbing my eyes. I'm like, it's just impossible.
So I know you used our stuff. I know you didn't get a chance to really put it through its, test it really hard because of the time of year and everything. But we have a particular kind of formulation. It's called a reverse emulsion. There's no real easy way to explain this. So if you want me to, I'll dive into it. But they're built to be waterproof, really water resistant, right? It's opposite of what most sunscreen companies do. Some do it, very few. And you'll notice it because we have a video up on Instagram of a demonstration of putting sunscreen on a finger and just rubbing it and rinsing it in some water against the leading brand. And you can see that just come off. And you can see that a formulation like ours, a water and oil emulsion, it's called a reverse emulsion, does not come off. And this is purpose built for that. So two things. Does the chemical itself do anything? In case most sunscreens, no. But even if it does it ever get off to do anything? And so if you look at, and there are lots of, actual publications in this. I'm going back to Reef Safe now. You'll find benzophenone in the water. You'll find something called avobenzone, which is a very common UVA sunscreen. You actually don't find octinoxate in the water. You can find it sometimes in sand on a beach, but you don't find it in the water. And there's lots of reasons for that. And then when these same people look at normal sunscreen formulations versus the kind of thing that we do, they didn't actually look at our brand because we weren't around when they did the study, but the technology is virtually the same. We release this kind of formulation releases about a half to a tenth the amount of sunscreen into the environment that those really oily, greasy things. So again, you think I'm putting on this really oily, greasy stuff, right? Grease doesn't go into water. There's no way the sunscreen's going into the water. Turns out that those just dump the sunscreen right into the water. Right. That was a really long answer, but hopefully it was worthwhile.
Yeah, no. So so it sounds like, so chemicals can be some of the older chemicals could be potentially harmful, although they got rid of those. Those are not generally mass use, but the stigma around chemical sunscreens is not as bad as it's blown up to be, provided that. But it's just a matter of you have to pick the right formulation, the right kind that's going to have the least impact. And then also the way it's formulated is going to have a big impact, because that will determine how much of it gets released into the environment and then how much of it actually stays on your skin to protect you against the sun, but then also doesn't get absorbed and then do bad things to your body, right?
Yeah.
So the key thing is just finding the right chemical and the right formulation so that it does all the things that we just talked about. Is that the right way to think about it?
You're a quick study, Dan. And so, that's I think almost too much to ask the average person who has a day job to do, right? So again, you got to find a brand or something that you trust that is going to make good stuff. And we're not alone in that. There are companies that actually try to make good stuff out there. But there's a lot of companies that are just, frankly, just BS. So, you still see sunscreens advertised PABA free, right? Nobody has used PABA in 25 years. It's like saying plutonium free, right? I mean, there's really nothing to brag about there. Nobody has used that chemical forever, but people still think that's a good marketing tack.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If I can add something quickly, not to belabor the point, but from a surfer's perspective, this is just really important to me, which was like the whole concept of Reef Safe. So again, admittedly, prior to me learning about this stuff, I didn't know anything about it. Like I thought of Reef Safe in a similar vein as like FDA approved, in the sense that there's some organized government body or some entity that came out with a series of tests and a set of rules that determined whether or not something was going to harm the reef. It's a no-brainer. I'm a surfer. I live in the water. I live in Costa Rica. I live in Garza. There's beautiful reefs everywhere. The last thing in the world that I want to do is, hurt them while I'm trying to, save myself from sunburn or whatnot. But when you actually dig into it, there's issues with that. There is no entity that determines whether or not something is reef safe, which is annoying because it means that the people that do, and there's 3 general bodies that do so, they have different criteria and different rules. And so there is, sunscreen companies that say reef safe, they follow a standard, and then their formula is reef safe based off of the standard that they're following, but it is not a standardized process, across the world or even in the United States, which is an important point because then it means that it doesn't actually mean anything, which is just frustrating. And where this really clicked for me was that sort of, subtle shift from, is the stuff that I'm putting on my face, is that bad for the ocean? Which is a very important conversation, but the as a surfer, the easier way, the better way to look at it is just, all right, is the stuff that I'm putting on my face just dumping into the ocean? Like that's a more relevant way to look at it, because the reality is that if you take a coral reef, put it in isolation, and you dump anything on it, whether it's vitamin E, sunscreen, cow's milk, or anything that's not water, it's going to be bad for it. Like it's kind of like a no shit. So it's not a question of in isolation, dump the sunscreen on it. Is it good or bad? It's whilst I use it, is it bleeding off my face and into the ocean? And at scale, when hundreds and hundreds of people do that over 10, 20, 30 years in a particular surf spot, right, all of that buildup, is that killing the reef? Which is to be crystal clear, that's a huge problem. No one wants that. But it's one of those sort of like nuances that, as a surfer, I cared so much about, but then realized that I actually knew nothing about it.
Right. That is what is interesting, is in understanding this science here is kind of opening my eyes to like how this is all actually working. Yeah. And a lot of myths in my head have been kind of busted. So
go ahead, man.
So, there has been a lot of activity in the sunscreen space. I mean, your rival, Kelly Slater, brand Kelly Slater, you're Kelly Slater 2.0. He put out Hydrosilk. So how does Burned compare to Hydrosilk? And I know his whole thing is like, he wants to be very safe for his skin because, Kelly, he's very, known for being super health conscious. Like, so is his stuff mineral only? And I know they're talking about like, it's good for your microbiome on your skin. Like, what is all that, like, is his mineral or is it chemical? And like, his is also clear. And that, by the way, is the reason why I didn't buy it. Cause I'm like, there's no way that that is as strong as like a hard barrier. But now I understand the science a little bit more. I'm like, okay, then maybe I do need to re-examine this. But like, how's yours different from Hydrosilk then, for example?
Yeah, so I think that's an all mineral sunscreen.
Yeah, so I can give an overview, and then Mark or Dad, you should give the science. So Kelly Slater, Freaks of Nature. Before I go any further, I like that sunscreen. Like I don't want to just turn this into me shitting on Kelly Slater sunscreen. I bought it when I was doing research for sunscreens. I used it in Costa Rica before I had our stuff available. It's an all mineral sunscreen, so a lot of zinc oxide in there. I used the 50 SPF one, which is an oil base, all mineral sunscreen. And they have all the sort of disclaimers of Reef Safe, microbiome friendly, which actually I don't think they have on the sunscreen.
Yeah, they don't say that. They don't say that on the sunscreen.
But they plaster it all over the website. And so, there's a bunch of technical differences between our sunscreens, but just as a jumping off point, the primary difference is going to be theirs is an all mineral sunscreen and ours is a hybrid sunscreen. From a feeling standpoint, theirs is going to be heavier and greasier. Ours is going to be much lighter and not greasy at all. And from a, call it like protective standpoint, theirs is great stuff. Ours is going to protect you for a lot longer. And so I could say that anecdotally.
Right. Well, that's what I was curious about, because I remember in our discussion earlier, Mark, you were saying like the zinc, the pure mineral, it's hard to get a really good barrier unless you like get it really thick. I think that's what you said. Maybe I'm just misremembering.
So it's hard to keep it on the skin.
Right.
So the term is density. So zinc oxide weighs 4 times more than water. Right. So if you got a bucket of zinc oxide and a bucket of water, the zinc oxide is going to weigh 4 times more. And just think about that. You're trying to keep these little tiny particles of zinc oxide on your skin, which weigh a lot, right? They want to sink, and you can do it, right? But the way most people do it is they do it with fairly thick oils. And that's why the sunscreen you used in South America, that's why, virtually everybody who's trying to do what Kelly's trying to do ends up with these formulas. And they can be better, but they just in our hands can't be great. And we want to make a great sunscreen, right? Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, I invented this stuff, right? Nobody likes zinc oxide more than I do. Nobody's more attached to making that ingredient work the best it can. The reality is you can't get the performance out of it that you can with a hybrid product. So we chose to do a hybrid because it feels great. I'll get back to how long it lasts in a second. It goes on really smoothly. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't exacerbate acne at all. It's if you wear makeup, put makeup on top of it, no problem, because it dries down so well. If you're a golfer, you can put it on your hands. You don't have to go wash your hands afterwards. Or you can apply it with your hands. You don't have to go wash your hands. I use it all the time before I go golfing. Things don't fly out of my hands, when I'm driving. So I want to get back to it stays on. So we built this formula, and I mentioned a little bit this water and oil idea, this reverse emulsion, right? These things are designed to stay put. And we didn't invent that technology. I would say that we're getting the most out of it that you can, and probably a lot more than other folks. And that's just because we've got collectively, 25 years of experience doing this. But if you notice all sunscreen tubes, they look a lot alike, right? They use the same language. The back of the tube looks identical. They always have a little drug facts panel and some warnings, and then, apply this way, and then the inactive ingredients. And the reason they all look exactly the same is because the FDA says this is how your sunscreen tube has to look. Right? You've got no choice. Here are the things that you have to say. On the front of the tube, you've got a little more leeway, but not that much. Right? So you can't make crazy claims. And when it comes to being water resistant, you can only say water resistant. You can't say waterproof. 20 years ago, you could actually say waterproof. The FDA said nothing's waterproof. Don't be stupid. You can't say that anymore. And you can only say water resistant for either 40 minutes or 80 minutes because those are the tests. So a lot of people don't realize this when we market a sunscreen, we being the royal we, anybody who does it, and it says SPF 10, that's actually tested on humans. That number comes from doing human testing. And when they say water resistant for 40 minutes, it means that they put sunscreen on, they saw the SPF, what it was, they stuck the person in a jacuzzi or something like it for 40 minutes and then retested the SPF. And if it was a 20 before the jacuzzi and 10 afterwards, what you're allowed to put in the label is 10, right? And you do that for 40 or 80 minutes. So if you have a sunscreen that lasts 5 hours, you actually can't say that in the US. You can only say 80 minutes. And so, I can't say our sunscreen lasts for X hours, but I can tell you that it was really built to stay on. And you can read anecdotal stuff in our reviews and other stuff. You can't get that without using the same kind of formulation we use. And I say that not that I own that we don't own that formulation type. We're really good at using it, but we don't own it. So it's nothing, that only we can do. We're just really good at it. It's more expensive. It's a little harder to make. There's reasons people don't do it, but they're business reasons. They're not product reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm so curious. I'm okay. That's really interesting. I mean, what it makes me think about, and like I mentioned, Mark, and we had this discussion before we started, right? Like I was down there during rainy season, so I didn't really get to fully test it. So I'm curious. Like I would so be curious to see, like, I guess, could you guys like do a test and just do it yourself, and then you're not making any claims, but you just like show like your sunscreen after however many X many hours, and then another one. That's like, I think as a surfer, I almost like, I understand if you're just a normal beach goer and you're just chilling on the beach and like, I don't want my face to be greasy. I don't care what my face feels like. I just want protection. I just want a protection, and I just don't want to look like a freak. I don't want to look like a zombie. But like, if all those other things are pluses, but the biggest thing for me is I just want protection that lasts a long time, because I will be in the water 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours, like, and I want it to stick. That's the most important thing to me. So anything that actually is going to do that is, that's going to be a game changer.
So Van, I will give you sunscreen for life if you go do that experiment and then you say how well it worked or didn't work.
Yeah. I'm just going to do one half of my face in burned and then another half in another brand. And let's see if I come out looking like the Joker or something like that. I guess that would be
go for it. We'll be happy to get behind that. But what we're not going to do is piss off the FDA.
Right.
And so, and they take this very seriously, and for good reason, right? You don't want people selling crap out there. So yeah.
I think, sorry to cut you off, Dad. You kind of asked this, Van, but I think it's interesting to go into, even if it's a little sciencey. But like, we mentioned, the formula. Like, it's not trade secrets that we have under lock and key, and it's not just us as general sunscreen education. Like, how does it actually work? And you can kind of draw that in relation to just say Kelly's as an example being an all mineral formula. But again, I'm sort of drawing from what I found most interesting about learning about this, particularly as a surfer, was like, I spend all day reading about how this concave affects this part of my surfing, even if realistically it makes no difference. Whatever fucking surf.
You still surf like crap. I still surf like crap. It doesn't matter.
No, there's unfortunately there's not a correlation between how much money I can spend versus how good I get. My life would be a lot simpler if that was. But sunscreen's a little different to where the science actually matters, even to the layperson. And so, Dad, if you want to sort of explain the science a little bit, I think that would be useful.
I'm not sure which side you're talking about, but I do want to make one thing clear. So we're, we are trying to point out that there's a lot of crap out there, and it is a little buyer beware. I do want to point out that we've got no reason. This is not just because he's Kelly. I've got no reason to believe his stuff is crap. And by all means, if I was stuck in Costa Rica and I had a bottle of his stuff and not a bottle of mine, I'd use his stuff. I use any good brand. But there's good and there's better. And, we're striving to make the absolute best thing. Mac, when you said the signs, anything in particular? Because there's...
Yeah, so just, we went over a little bit. What is a reverse emulsion? How does it actually stick to your skin? The polarity question of it. What are the things that make it do the thing that it does?
Yeah, so if you have a lotion, if you look in the back of any tube and you see water as the first ingredient, and then you've got a bunch of stuff that looks like oil, that's an emulsion of some kind, right? And an emulsion is, think salad dressing, right? It's oil and vinegar. Vinegar is just like water for this example. Oil is oil. And if you take oil and vinegar and just shake it really hard, you notice it mixes for a second and then it separates.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just because water doesn't like oil. And oddly enough, oil floats, right? You'd think oil's thick and viscous and be heavier. It's actually lighter than water. So the oil goes to the top. That's really important also when you're thinking about, these oil sunscreens hurting the reef, right? They float, right? They don't go to the friggin' bottom of the ocean. That's another whole story. Some certainly can get down there. So to stop that from happening, you use a little chemistry. They're called emulsifiers. So they're molecules that half the molecule likes water, half the molecule likes oil, right? So when you shake really hard, you create these little droplets of, in the salad dressing example, oil inside of water. The molecule, one half parks it in the oil, and the other half parks itself in the water. So it surrounds that little oil droplet, and because it surrounds it, it makes it stable. Now that oil droplet can stay an oil droplet and just float around happily in the water, right? That's a normal emulsion. That's 99% of the stuff you get at the drugstore. That's 99% of sunscreens. Because those emulsifiers are made to dissolve oil into water, when you go swimming, the sunscreens are all oil soluble, right? They're all oils of one kind or another. And even zinc and titanium are treated with something to make them look like an oil, because oils are easier to formulate with. Those emulsifiers are working against you. They're actually trying to take the sunscreen off your skin and dump it into the ocean, right? A reverse emulsion, which is the technology we use, instead of being a droplet of oil in water, it's a droplet of water in oil, right? Still needs an emulsifier, but it's the mirror image. It's a flip of the one I talked about. When you go in the water, because it's the reverse, it's not working to take that oil off of your skin. In fact, it's working to keep the oil on your skin. I don't know if you can work in the video, but you should really look at that little demo we did. It's really instructive. Yeah. You can see stuff just comes off in water, even though it passed a 40 or 80 minute waterproof test. Because if you see something that says a 20, water resistant for 40 minutes, and it's a crappy formula, pretty good chance it started out as a 50 or something. And by the time it was done, it was only a 20, and 20 is what they get put in the label. Our brand, as an example, Burn SPF 41, it was a 41 before we put it in the water. It was a 41 80 minutes later, right? It didn't drop a single point. And if the sunscreen was coming off into the jacuzzi, it literally is a kind of a jacuzzi, then the SPF would have dropped.
Right.
Right. Wow. And so it's like a lot of things in life, right? It's not just the chemical that's doing the job. It's what you put that into.
And the chemical that you're using as well, like you studied a bunch of chemicals, and some of them, like the older ones you said, were bad, but you guys chose a chemical that I'm assuming is safe. It's not a chemical.
It's so the FDA in the US, we have fewer ingredients than people can use in Europe, right? And so there really aren't new sunscreens, or have been for a long time. In fact, zinc oxide, believe it or not, is one of the newest sunscreens. In 1991, when we started the company, our first company, zinc oxide wasn't actually a legal sunscreen, believe it or not. So we had to get that through the FDA. Everybody knew it worked, but nobody ever bothered to do it. So we're not using sort of newer sunscreens, so to speak, but we're using the best of the old stuff, which are really good. And so things like benzophenone, Palba, these are all still legal sunscreens, but nobody uses them, even though you legally could. So we use zinc oxide. That's kind of the workhorse. And then to get the SPF up higher than we can get in a really elegant formula without using other things, we use octinoxate and something called homosalate, which are probably two of the most, if not the most studied sunscreens on the planet. Yeah, and they're really safe. It's what I smeared all over a junior there as a child. And
look how he came out though. Not great.
I don't know if that's an argument for the safety of the product.
You can't tell, but he's only 2.5 feet tall.
Yeah, he has some minor mental defects, I'm sure, but his skin looks fine, so.
Yeah, no, this is really it is state of the art, but it's state of the art not only with ingredients, with formulation, which is half the battle.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is so, I've never knew I could learn this much about sunscreen. Holy crap.
It's painful, isn't it? I mean,
It's actually fascinating because I think that if I had not done, I mean, me being honest, right? If I had not done this discussion, I probably would have tried Burn a little bit more, but then I'd be like, I don't know, it just still doesn't look like it's protecting me as much. Like I mentioned, I wore it on a surf trip, but it was rainy season, so it was like cloudy, so I didn't really get to fully test it. And like when I touch the sunscreen, I'm like in the water 4, 5, 6 hours a day, and like I get, I'm lucky I don't get crazy burns, but like the weirdest thing, I mean, I look like a feral like animal, after like several weeks, and I'm like anything that will prevent me from looking like insane like that. Like I get these weird, like my eyelids surprisingly don't get tan. I don't know, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then I get these weird like triangles underneath my eyes. I don't even know how it happens, and I look scary. So I anything that would prevent me from not looking like a freak. So now I'm like, I'm actually going to give this stuff a shot, So,
but I'll tell you another sort of gift with purchase with the kind of formulation we use. I mean, I knew this was going to happen, but it's not the reason I did it. That same barrier it sets up, right? It sets up this beautiful barrier that keeps water off of you. So it keeps water from the outside getting through, but it also keeps water that's in your skin from getting out. And so if you talk to folks that have used these kinds of products, in the middle sun, like, so I'm not a surfer. Malachy's a surfer, but I did a fair amount of high altitude stuff in my life. The biggest problem, and you guys have it too, is paradoxically you're in the water, but you're in the sun, your skin gets super dry, and that won't happen with these kinds of products because it's a moisture barrier, and it's a barrier both directions. And so, again, you can read some of the reviews. We've got some pro surfers using this stuff who we're not paying. You can chat with them. You know them, I'm sure. Yeah, so it's really amazing what you can do with right if you understand how to formulate stuff.
Yeah,
you take the best actives and you stick them in the best formula, and you have something that's truly different.
Interesting. All right. Well, I am going to test it. If there's anybody on the podcast that also knows somebody from HydroSilk, I want to interview those guys as well. And I want to get Kelly in there. That would be so funny if I finally get Kelly on the podcast, but it's about sunscreen. I'm going to ask him all the technique questions I want to ask him anyway, though. Yeah. But this was a super interesting conversation. It's definitely opened my eyes about the science of sunscreen. But like, yeah, I just didn't realize like how there's just so many myths that were just busted in my head right now. So, but now I'm still somebody that's skeptical. I'm like, I got to try it out for myself and see what happens.
Get out there, man. Where are you now?
I'm in Brooklyn, but I'm just holed up working all the time. That's what I'm doing. So
it is 80 out right now and sunny. So
it is. I guess I'll just have to go test it out there. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we're coming up on time, but this was a very enlightening discussion. So where should guys find you, guys and girls find you? Like, what's your Instagram? What's your website and all that?
Yeah. So we're at getburn.com. And we're at Burn Skincare for our socials.
And then you spell burned. How do you spell burned again? Because you guys got a funky spelling to it.
Yeah. BURND.
Okay, nice. And if people have questions, I guess they can just go to your Instagram. They can ask you all the science questions, and then Mark is going to be personally answering every DM, isn't he?
You can answer.
Unfortunately, there's more truth in that than you know.
Yeah. They can also ping the email. It's shows on the website, and that goes right to me. So for anyone out there that's listening that wants to combat, ask questions, or just ask for help in anything, we're always here.
For sure. I mean, as a surfer, you're just constantly lathering this stuff on your face, So that's probably the reason why Kelly decided to do a sunscreen, because he's like, this is something I care about. And I think a lot of people do care about this. I care about my sunscreen, but I don't care about it in terms of like, I just mostly am like, I want to get the maximum protection. And what you guys got cooking up definitely sounds promising. So I'm going to give it a shot and let everybody know how it goes.
Well, Ben, thank you.
Thank you, man.
All right. Well, I'll see you guys later.
See you.
Peace.